recording. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rebecca Beeman, and I started the Network for College Success 3 years ago. It's truly incredible to see how much it's grown from 24 community-based organizations at 7 campuses, which Marcia, who was just talking, used to be one of our campus coordinators, to over 90 community-based organizations and school networks across the city, all 18 CUNY undergraduate campuses, and over 600 college access and success professionals and higher education professionals. We have a packed agenda waiting for you, and I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items before we dive in. We do ask you to remain on mute during the presentations, but would love to see your face if you're comfortable with sharing your video. We're recording today's session, and we'll send out a recording after with all of the materials shared today. And we will be dropping in the chat the link to all of the materials. So if you want to look at them during presentations, if that's how you learn, we'll be doing that. If you have any questions or need tech support during today's session, please feel free to private message me or my colleague, Latiqua Washington, the program manager of the Network for College Success. Latiqua, do you want to take yourself off mute and wave so that people see your smiling face this morning?
Hello, everyone. Just put in the chat the program guide, so that's going to help you navigate today's session.
Great. And Melissa Herman, the director of Grad NYC, will also be here for tech support. Melissa, do you want to say hello this morning?
Hi, good morning, everybody. Nice to see you. Excited to see so many faces in the audience. And yes, if you have questions about either the presentations or other issues, feel free to message me.
Great. So now it's my pleasure this morning to hand it over to our Dean of CUNY K-16 Initiatives, Andrea Sunichin, to formally welcome us this morning.
Thanks, Rebecca. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. The crisis in equitable higher education is not new to anyone here today. Long before the pandemic, each one of you and your organizations was ringing the alarm about the growing socioeconomic gap in access and degree completion. You all have been working tirelessly for years to ask how our institutions of higher ed can be student ready and how we can support all students in reaching success. But as we emerge from this pandemic, we know both that the challenge before us is even greater and that we may have some unprecedented opportunities to think about new ways of working to address these longstanding challenges. Beginning in July, CUNY will begin to welcome what maybe it's our most unique group of students in our long history. First-time freshmen, especially the up to 70% usually who are coming from DOE high schools, will be launching their college careers following over a year and a half of interrupted and virtual remote learning. The academic needs of these students, we all know, is framed by widespread and still ongoing loss and trauma and financial insecurity experienced by tens of thousands of New Yorkers over the last year through the pandemic that we know also has had a disproportionate impact on our Black and Latinx communities. The direct and indirect effects on New York City students of the pandemic is one of the biggest challenges facing the city and the state in our recovery. So across the university, we've been grappling with these realities throughout the year, as you have, and working to enact responsive policies and programs that can begin to support this incoming class. Early in the academic year, as you may remember, we announced that CUNY admissions would not be reviewing standardized test scores and making admissions decisions. Throughout the year, the central admissions team has worked closely with campuses to support implementation of this policy. In late winter, we began initial conversations with campus leaders to discuss orientation programs for new students starting this summer 2021. We heard loud and clear in those conversations that student leadership and peer-led programming is what campuses wanted in order to build innovative, expanded orientation experiences that would welcome the incoming class in a holistic way and not silo social emotional needs from academic needs. The result is CUNY Welcome Corps, that we are proud to be launching this summer. Up to 2,000 students with paid employment through the Summer Youth Employment Program will support welcome activities across our campuses. Looking at current students, we also see how the pandemic has expanded and deepened CUNY's approach to unsiloing and emphasizing mental health supports, addressing food insecurity, and been a catalyst for a deep look at grading policies and how faculty support student health and learning. All of these policies and initiatives reflect some of the guiding core values that we brought to ensuring the health and wellness of students during this time, leading by listening to our students and our stakeholders. Implementing this work has also challenged campuses to view student success ever more holistically and embrace community partnership more than before. These are all opportunities for us all to continue to build on in the coming months. As we look ahead to the coming months, the high school class of 2021 will be preparing for their next steps at an incredibly fraught moment. Just like all of us, they're emerging from months of isolation and figuring out in a very unclear landscape what decisions they can make about their own health and safety and commitments to their future. The future of the city and even what the fall semester may look like is very unknown at the exact moment that we're asking them to make a significant commitment to their future. To navigate that, these students will need all of us working together to be there for them. This morning, we're coming together to begin to think about what that might look like now in this context, to be there for our students, to believe in them and understand what they need. And we'll begin that with a look at what we already know about CUNY enrollment trends in the past year and what that can tell us about the work ahead. On that note, it's my pleasure to introduce Sarah Trulsch, CUNY's Director of Policy Research. She's one of the lead architects of CUNY's comprehensive remediation reform plan. She also leads CUNY's data sharing and collaborative research work with the DOE and the Research Alliance for New York City Schools. In addition to her work defining college readiness and increasing college access, her other current research projects include work related to transfer students, adult learners, academic momentum, financial aid policies, and student diversity. Before joining CUNY in 2010, she was a research associate at the American Institutes for Research at New American Schools and a consultant with the New York City Department of Ed. Sarah has an MPA from New York University's Wagner School of Public Service and a BA from the University of Chicago. Sarah's work gives her an important vantage point across CUNY and the DOE and the trajectories of our students through those institutions. And I'm so glad that she could join us this morning to provide this valuable insight and get our conversation started. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Andrea. So I'm going to switch into sharing my screen. And what I'd like to do is share about 5 to 6 different slides with you all that demonstrate some trends in CUNY enrollments and sort of talk about the position that we're in right now and kind of how it looks relative to what had been going on up until the time of the pandemic. I'll talk maybe 5-7 minutes, and then I think that should leave us 3 to 5 minutes for questions and answers. While I'm sharing my slides, I won't be able to see the chat. So if you want to put questions there or hold them, I promise we'll save some time at the end so that we can get through questions. So what I'd like to start out by doing is just quickly looking at the trajectory that CUNY had been on until last year. So what you can see here is my chart on the left side shows overall undergraduate enrollment since 2000. The bottom line shows graduate enrollment, the top line shows undergraduate enrollment, and what you see is this pretty strong, clear upward trajectory. And actually, between 2000 and a peak in 2014, CUNY added 73,000 new undergraduate students. That's 43% growth during that time period. So really an incredibly strong trajectory of very steady growth. So changes from year to year, but if we look over a long period of time, it's really just continued to be growing access, better retention, higher new student enrollments. We had a peak, as I said, in 2014, but the overall enrollment had been pretty stable between 2014 and 2019 before a rapid dip in 2020. And I think even more striking than these changes in the overall enrollments is what happened with our first-time freshman enrollment. So again, since 2000, what this chart on the right shows is first-time freshman enrollment in fall terms. And we've had a remarkably strong trajectory of growth over the last 20 years. Overall, we've gone from under 25,000 freshmen a year to 2019 was actually an all-time record peak for the first time that we had more than 40,000 freshmen enrolling in a single fall term. So that's the kind of history that we were coming on. And that's part of why what we've seen since the onset of the pandemic has been such a drastic, sharp break from where we had been. So comparing 2019 to 2020, we had a nearly 10% drop in overall freshman enrollment entering in the fall term. Overall, 3,500 fewer freshmen than the year before. And again, this is such a sharp drop with what we've seen before. It really feels like, sort of, as Andrea said, a lot of the challenges that we're dealing with during the pandemic are not brand new. They're coming on a context of lots of challenges for the population of students that we serve, questions about where higher education fits within students' plans, all of the logistical challenges we know that make getting into college and staying in college harder than it sometimes feels like it should be, but something really different happened in the last year related to the pandemic that I think requires different types of students. And now I want to dig into a little bit more about what exactly happened and sort of who is missing from the pool of freshmen for 2020 and in this year relative to years before. So these charts compare freshman enrollment by CUNY campus. The blue bar in each of these sets is 2019 overall freshman enrollment, and then the orange bar is the 2020 freshman enrollment. And the first thing that you can see is that at every one of our community colleges, with the potential exception of small Gutman over here, there was large drops in the number of freshmen. So really seeing is this decline in freshmen is heavily concentrated at CUNY's community colleges. Not only at the community colleges, there were also drops in CUNY's less selective senior colleges. So York campus, for those of you who are familiar with it, Medgar Evers also had a decline. It wasn't necessarily across the board. Some of our more selective senior colleges actually managed to have some enrollment growth. So we saw a little bit with Hunter, with Queens. With Lehman, strong freshman enrollment in a handful of selected schools, but really among the less select, the open access colleges, nearly all of them saw broad freshman enrollment declines, and those really translated into over enrollment declines. And perhaps not incredibly surprisingly, but really disappointingly, there were big demographic differences in the freshman enrollment declines that we saw. So overall, as I mentioned, 3,500 fewer freshmen, 10% decline, but the enrollment declines were much more concentrated and much more visible for male students of all races than they were for female students, but especially so for Black and male freshmen. So our number of Black male freshmen across the entire university declined by 17% compared to the number we had and we managed to enroll in 2019. For Hispanic male freshmen, that was down nearly 6%. Now, in contrast, the enrollment declines for Asian and white women were really just about 1%, nearly flat. And if we sort of look at the relative sizes of the groups who declined, our biggest drop was in Black male freshmen, followed by Black female freshmen, followed by Hispanic male freshmen, followed by Hispanic female freshmen. Now, one thing I want to share with you all is that these kind of declines, while I think they're rooted in a lot of specifics of the New York City experience and environment, are not unique to CUNY and not unique to New York City. In fact, they really mirror what we're seeing across the entire country. So overall, there was a really sharp in university enrollments and college enrollments across the entire country last year, especially first-time freshmen and especially community college freshmen, by some estimates down as much as 20% across the country last year. And again, the same kind of demographic groups that we're seeing being hardest hit in the CUNY context are the same demographic groups that we're seeing being hardest hit across the country. So there's really something about this kind of larger experience of the pandemic and the economic crisis and all of the changes in education and society that it's meant for students. Again, I think there's ways that plays out differently from community to community, but there's ways in which we're also seeing just a really broad national trend. And I'm going to finish now by just talking a little what we're seeing with the spring 2021 term that we're in right now. So once again, we had a decline in first-time freshmen. The vast majority of freshmen come into our colleges in the fall term, but we normally enroll about 7,000 freshmen in the spring term as well. This spring, our freshman enrollments were down nearly by about 1,000 students, from in the mid 6,000s to just under 6,000, or to just under 6,000 for this current term. So, and we might have hoped a little bit that we are seeing some students sitting out the fall term who could have come back in spring. We really don't see that with the spring freshman enrollment numbers. Again, these declines are completely at the community colleges. They're really concentrated in access institutions. Our transfer student enrollments were also down. And again, big differences college to college, but very large drops in transfer enrollment, especially at the less selective senior colleges and the community colleges. And among the things that really worry me is the fall to spring persistence rate for students. Overall, sort of looking at all of our students, we had about 1% decline at the rate of students who were enrolling in the fall term to re-enroll in the spring term. But for students who were new first-time freshmen in the fall 2020 term, their re-enrollment rate into the spring term was 79%, which on its face doesn't sound terrible in historical terms, but that's down from 83% from last year's fall 2019 freshmen who enrolled in the spring term. So compared to that, it really is a sharp decline. And so we've got some concerns that the difficulty with transition, the difficulty with experiencing this remote learning experience has fallen most heavily on new students. It seems to be that students further along in their careers are, for various reasons, have been better able to maintain their persistence and have relatively stable rates of re-enrollment. And it's the newest students that are the newest enrollees to our system are having the most trouble persisting or staying engaged with college during this time. So I'm going to end there and pause for questions and discussion. And I think Rebecca, you can tell me if we want people to put things in the chat or if we want people to raise hands.
Yeah, so if you feel comfortable coming off mute and asking a question, go for it. If you would like to put it in the chat, that is also an option. Oh, Joseph, you have your hand raised. Go for it.
Hi, good morning, Sarah. Thank you for the information. I have my camera off in it because I have construction going on behind me and all that stuff in my apartment. Do you think that the decline in enrollment is a direct kind of looming effect as to where the American economy is going? You know, I believe last week President Biden was pushing, you know, like the extra years of community college, but also a push for more trade work to be done. So do you think that that could be an option, well, a reason why enrollment numbers have been lower, just due to more Black and Hispanic students wanted to go the trade route rather than the traditional community college four-year route?
Yeah, you know, that's a really great question. I think the first thing to say is, you know, we don't entirely know. Historically, so especially looking back at something like the economic recession of 2008, 2009, and looking at enrollment sort of economic downturns throughout the last 50 years or so, generally those are accompanied by an increase in college enrollments, especially community college enrollments. So as the labor market is less strong, sort of the opportunity cost of staying out of the labor market to go to college is low, which makes college more attractive, and people often seek upskilling to improve their labor prospects. So that didn't happen at all last year at CUNY or really any place else. So it's a real break from historical trends in the relationship between economic prospects or job prospects and education and higher education in particular. So it's really feeling very much like uncharted territory, and we don't fully know what is going on. We know from some national survey data that a lot of people report changing their college going plans specifically because of the pandemic, uncertainty related to either feeling comfortable on campuses or remote learning, or planning to take some time off to see if school would normalize. So those were the stronger signals about people being out of higher education just because they were uncomfortable with the higher education environment, rather than opting into different types of instruction. I don't think that we've seen an increase in any kind of educational sectors like certificates or non-certified sort of boot camps and things that would possibly signal that change. But the big answer is there's a lot we really just don't know. Okay, and there's a bunch of questions coming in here, I think, about what's being done and implemented to increase persistence. I might kick that over to Andrea. But let me look at some of the other questions about, do persistence rates look different for first-year students in support programs versus not in support programs? Yeah, the sort of short answer is yes. And it varies by program and it varies by college, but certainly students in ASAP are having much stronger persistence rates. Though I think even across those support programs, while the persistence is stronger relative to the general population, year over year compared to one another, students in support programs are seeing some declines, but not to the same extent as the general population. That's sort of consistent with what we generally see. Okay. Okay, there's a question about, as we work to improve enrollment rates for upcoming semesters, do you think CUNY will remain test optional or a plan to go back to using standardized scores for admissions? That's something that CUNY's board is, yeah. Want to say hi? Yeah. Future student recruitment. Hi. It's home today for the sniffles. Okay, go ahead. So the CUNY's board is currently considering whether you maintain the current policy of not collecting SAT scores for students who will be applying through next year's cycle. So that's something we should know about in the next month or so. And okay. Someone put in, anecdotally, students are burned out and feeling disconnected, even those who are persisting. Yeah, I think that's something that probably will come up a lot in discussion for throughout the rest of the day. I think a lot of these, but certainly we've all heard that anecdotally as well, that even the students who are persisting, there's going to come a breaking point for everyone. So students have made it through, going hopefully through 3 semesters now, but there's a question about how much longer things can maintain sort of the way that they are. Yeah, that's a real concern, even for students who have made this far. And yeah, and then there's also a comment in the chat about students' priorities having shifted, especially parents and children. Absolutely, that's definitely something that we've seen in surveys, something that we've seen sort of in anecdotes about just the difficulty people have of balancing so many things at once. I think a lot of us can probably relate to that. Okay.
Sika, I see your hand raised. If you have a question, I think we have maybe time for one more question.
Okay. Sure, I'll try to pick one. I'm just wondering if there's been or if there's plans to do any comparison between second year persistence rates from students who started in fall 2019 and how they're doing currently, in addition to just the first year comparison, because I'm trying to wonder if there's if part of the issue is the transition from high school to college, so right, the summer melt that can occur, or if there's also some work that needs to be done once they're in to support them to remain, just kind of differentiating between the 2 areas.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. That's something we are beginning to look at. I know that last year's students enrolled in spring coming back in fall rates were actually stable and slightly up from what they had been the year before. And I think coming back to the point we just had, it's just now in the transition from last fall to this spring that we're seeing slightly declining retention rates, and maybe up to this, like, students did it for a couple of semesters and are now feeling a bit more of a strain. But right now, the biggest drop is really those first year students coming in. They had a much bigger decline in retention than continuing students who had started a few semesters before. Okay, Rebecca, I'm gonna let you figure out what we want to do with questions in the chat, or if we need to move on now.
Yes, I think it probably is time to move on, but we will collect those questions and maybe we can send them over to you if there's a little bit more information you might be able to provide us. And I'll pass it over to Melissa. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again, Sarah. I want to sort of introduce our next speakers and also hopefully connect the dots between Sarah's presentation and our next presentation. So over the past year, Graduate NYC has conducted a research study, which our two research fellows are going to speak about in a minute. But it was really to understand the stories behind these enrollment trends. And so we're hoping that this presentation will start to contextualize some of the data that we just heard from Sarah and really put into perspective students' own words on what they were experiencing this past year and why they made the decisions that they did. So I'd like to introduce Deanna and Kiana. Deanna is our research fellow who is helping to lead this project. She's currently a doctoral student at Teachers College at Columbia. And Kiana Medina is just wrapping up her master's degree in urban education at Brown. And so she's been our research assistant this past year. And I will kick it over to them to share their screens, and we'll go from there. And if people have questions about their presentation, you can also feel free to chat those to me, and we'll keep track of those for when we have time for questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Melissa. Let me just share my screen. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Can you see that okay? Good. Okay, awesome. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Like Melissa said, my name is Kiana Medina, and I'm a predoctoral fellow with Graduate NYC. I also just completed my master's degree in urban education policy from Brown University this past Saturday, actually. I just graduated. I'm joined by Diana Cordova-Cobo, who is a research fellow with Graduate NYC as well. And today we'll be presenting the emerging findings of our study titled Transitioning to College During COVID-19, the experiences of first-year CUNY students during the pandemic. Melissa Herman and Dr. Nicole Simon are co-principal investigators, and Alex Rowland rounds out the project team on this project. So today we'll be sharing some background on the CUNY context that sheds light on the importance of this particular study at this point in time. We'll gloss over our research questions and methodology for the study, and Diana will delve into some of our emerging findings that are represented within 3 particular student stories. To understand the purpose behind the study, we have to understand CUNY's enrollment trends before the onset of the pandemic. And as Sarah Trolsch previously mentioned, enrollment at CUNY was rising prior to COVID-19. And this trend was primarily attributed to the increase in New York City public school graduation rates and college going rates, where we saw over 80% of New York City public high school students enrolling in college immediately after high school. 27% of these New York City graduates go on to attend a CUNY senior college, and 30% are enrolled in a community college at CUNY. And our current insights actually confirm our initial fears that the pandemic has already caused a decrease in enrollment across CUNY campuses, disproportionately affecting community colleges and potentially having long-term effects for current and future CUNY students, as well as the broader New York City community. So for this reason, it's really fitting that our study aims to understand how the pandemic impacted the college transition for first-year students, specifically students who graduated from a New York City DOE school in the spring of 2020. And along the way, we also found it necessary to have additional conversations with administrators, which provided us with much needed insight into the university's perspectives and their efforts during the shift to remote learning. Very early on, we honed in on our scope and we decided to analyze community colleges and four-year schools within 3 of New York City's 5 boroughs. So we looked at 6 schools total. And prior research shows that students at community colleges and four-year schools have very different experiences and face different challenges. So we thought that by including 2-year and 4-year schools, we would really be able to capture and analyze the differences, which will have important implications for practice and policy. So to answer our research questions, we interviewed 3 groups of students who graduated from New York City public high schools in 2020. And these 3 groups consist of students who plan to enroll in a non-CUNY college and enrolled in CUNY instead, students who planned to enroll in CUNY and did indeed enroll in CUNY, as well as students who planned to enroll in CUNY but did not attend college at all in the fall of 2020. And so we chose those groups to ensure really representation of a wide variety of experiences. So far, we've interviewed 32 students, and we crafted our interview protocol in a way that touches on all aspects of a student's college transition, from their high school experiences to their current experiences in the 2020-2021 academic year, while of course inquiring about the effects of COVID-19 in the process. So as we've interviewed over a couple of dozen students so far, we've gained some really valuable knowledge about their experiences. So we've noticed that the pandemic's impact on students' college decision-making actually varied by student groups. So for students who were already committed to going to a CUNY before the pandemic because of financial concerns, the pandemic became just another factor to consider in a college choice process that is already strenuous for our students. And these students prioritized finances as well as geographic proximity to their families before the pandemic occurred. And the pandemic really just like solidified that decision for those students. And for students who were considering non-CUNY colleges before the pandemic, the switch to virtual learning, as well as the increased health risks because of the pandemic, actually pushed them to stay closer to home. And for this particular group, they really had significant concerns about missing out on the college experience and in-class learning. And across the board, we really noticed that students had to really hustle as they transitioned to college. Once students began online learning in high school, many of them lost out on the supports that they were receiving prior to the pandemic, and they were left to figure out the transition to college on their own for the most part. And other students were lucky enough to receive support by CUNY. Like programs like ASAP and SEEK, but not the majority of students. As I previously mentioned, students have also been devastated by the fact that they've missed out on the college experience and opportunities to socialize with their peers because of the remote nature of courses. So majority of the students that we've spoken with have actually had to create their own group chats to communicate with classmates. And we've even had one student who stated that he had to rely on other students to comprehend the course material. And additionally, we've also had students who have felt just completely isolated because of remote courses. And finally, we found that for the most part, students felt supported by the efforts made by CUNY and faculty as well. They specifically noted that their classes were easier to navigate when their professors provided them with a means to directly engage with students, and when they actually acknowledged the challenges that students were facing due to the pandemic. So that relatability and the ability to just address and acknowledge what students were going through was really important for students to feel comfortable. And with that, I will pass it over to Diana.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. So to illustrate how students experienced during the pandemic really aligned with the 4 themes that Kiana just shared, we're going to focus the rest of the presentation on the stories of 3 students in particular. The first student we're highlighting is Alex, who's a student at BMCC. She lives in Brooklyn with her 2 younger siblings and her mother. Alex, like many of the students we interviewed, had her plans altered by the pandemic. Her sights were initially set on Howard University, a 4-year HBCU, but after several ups and downs, she started her first full semester at BMCC this spring. Our second student, Jessica, is a Sikh student at Lehman. She lives in the Bronx with her mother. Jessica, like Alex, had different plans before the pandemic started. And so she had really imagined attending St. John's University in particular until job loss during the pandemic really upended her plans. When Jessica realized that St. John's was out of the question, she really leaned on her high school counselor to help her navigate a complex appeals process that eventually landed her at Lehman in the fall. And finally, our last student, Raya, is a Brooklyn College student who lives with her 3 younger siblings and a disabled mother. Raya is the main caretaker of her family, and even before the pandemic, she had already planned to stay close to home for those reasons. And so, like several of the other students, her plans were not changed by the pandemic, and instead, they really reflected this complicated web of factors that Kiana was talking about that continually influence lower income students' college choices and experiences in particular. And then while we couch the rest of the presentation in the experiences of these 3 students, something that we really want to emphasize is that student stories and experiences during the pandemic have been much more complex than we could have imagined when we started the project. So students didn't always fall into distinct categories, and the lines are often more blurred than not. But what we really hope is that by bringing the perspective of students and their voices to you today, you'll see that the multifaceted needs of students during this time really requires a multifaceted response from your organizations. And so while students like Raya planned on attending a CUNY school before the pandemic did play a major role in some students' enrollment decisions. So for students like Alex and Jessica, who were considering non-CUNY colleges before the pandemic, the switch to virtual learning, the increased financial instability, and the increased health risks brought on by the pandemic really pushed them to stay close to home. Alex's plans to attend Howard were upended when her option for free housing in particular fell through at the onset of the pandemic. So she recounted, "I was supposed to go away, but we see COVID put a damper on things. I lost housing. I was supposed to live with my aunt. She's really old and sickly, so she was like, it wouldn't work." And Alex, unable to secure financial help for housing, was really forced to change her plans and stay in the city. Similarly, Jessica worked multiple jobs in high school to save money to attend St. John's, but her mother and uncle both lost their jobs at the onset of the pandemic. And to make matters worse, her uncle didn't qualify for unemployment. And so Jessica felt a responsibility in particular to help her younger cousins who lived nearby. And so Jessica describes, "I had a plan, working a job, I had a scholarship, but then knowing financially it was not the same as before. My mother, she was unemployed. It was a struggle, so I started seeing what other options there were." And so that said, regardless of how their college plans were shaped by the pandemic, we're also finding that many students were forced to become entrepreneurial as they navigated various parts of the transition to college. Because as Kiana mentioned earlier, and as students described in their interviews, individualized supports that students were receiving before the pandemic really substantially declined when everything switched to virtual. And then once students enrolled in CUNY, they either received really targeted support from their on-campus programs, or they had to figure out the transition on their own. And what that support looked like, as was alluded to in the previous presentation, also really varied from campus to campus. And so Jessica, a student who was already used to juggling multiple responsibilities before the pandemic, drew on these experiences to kind of keep going when she says, when I was a senior, I was going to high school. Then I had to go to my college courses. I also had a job at Modell's and an internship. So it was just like, okay, if I can do all of these things, managing to get good grades, pass my college courses, still pick up shifts, I can do this. And the different experiences of students were especially clear when it came time to enroll in classes. So in a best case scenario, students had their schedules literally created for them by their college advisor and high school counselor. At the other end of the spectrum, students really described being completely confused and then eventually just figuring it out on their own. And so Raya, another student who was really used to juggling multiple demands before college because of her familial responsibilities, noted, they told me that you have to pick courses. And when I did go to the website, I was really confused. All I knew was that I had to choose from categories of classes. So I just chose something. And so as students navigated this transition, they were really notably grappling with the reality of not getting that college experience and the limited opportunities they had to engage with their peers. And so by the time we interviewed students in the spring, many had been dealing with quarantine for over a year and were really struggling with the ongoing isolation, even if they had not in the beginning of their fall semester. And so students looked forward to any type of socializing or peer engagement they could get through classes or even student programming that was going on across campuses. Some even directly referenced what they saw in movies like Alex when talking about this college experience they had built up in their head before the pandemic, who said, I always thought college would be living on my own and actually experiencing life, how they show it in the movies, how you make a few friends, you actually go to class and stuff. For many students, college was the chance to leave the neighborhoods they grew up in and experience something new. And like Jessica, many students commented on this throughout the interviews. Towards the very end, when asked about the challenges the pandemic presented, Jessica said, I didn't really get that college experience, that official first year, and that sucks. It's crazy how your mind changes. Okay, I'm set on St. John's. I have already got it all planned out. And then it's just like, I'm going to another college right down the block from my house. And so these students really mourned what could have been had the pandemic not occurred. And so given this previous finding, it makes sense then that students felt most supported when CUNY, when they received one-on-one guidance from CUNY and when the challenges of the pandemic were really acknowledged explicitly by faculty and staff. Though some students reported that workshops and emails were helpful for them at various points in the enrollment process and their transition, students rarely pointed to this as what they thought was the most helpful. Instead, they really talked about opportunities for one-on-one guidance and targeted communication that they got from CUNY staff and faculty. And so after encountering mostly unresponsive staff at Howard, the support Alex got from BMCC staff was a welcomed relief. And so she said, I got a lot of help from the BMCC registrar's office, just calling them about random things that I needed help with. No one gave me a hard time when I needed to ask things or get things done. It was pretty cool. And the same was true for students when they talked about their classes. And so Raya, when describing the courses she enjoyed the most in the fall, said, I thought the professors I had for those courses were very understanding, and they recognized that students might experience hardships, especially during the pandemic. And they were very caring and didn't scold anyone or anything. So I had a really good time in the class because of that. And so ultimately, the takeaway here is that students felt more cared for when they felt that their individual needs and concerns were being addressed. And so in light of these findings and what you all will be doing for the rest of this morning and the next part of the program, we really wanted to end on this concluding thought from Alex, and who's probably the student who experienced the most ups and downs in trying to find her footing of the 3 students that we highlighted today. So when she reflected on what she learned in the transition to college during the pandemic, she said, I feel more comfortable with school now rather than I did in the beginning, because I would look at school like something that's just extremely hard all the time, because all of my classes were hard and everything that I was trying to do is hard. But now I don't know. I look forward to starting. School is not one of those things that I want to quit. And I do actually want to learn more and get some degrees. So when I'm older, I'm wiser, you know? And so Alex, despite several setbacks, is optimistic about her future, even as she remains in this survival mode that we were talking about earlier. So all of the students we have interviewed so far are really just trying to figure it out and trying to persevere despite the ongoing pandemic around them. And to succeed, they really need an all hands on deck approach to continue to support them as they navigate the social, academic, and economic challenges. And our support for them really needs to be dynamic and multifaceted, because their experiences are dynamic and multifaceted. So hopefully some of what we shared will be helpful as you consider how you and your organization can kind of continue to support the current but also incoming students at CUNY. And if you have any questions or follow-ups about this ongoing study, because I know our time is limited right now, please make sure to reach out to Nicole or Melissa, who are the co-PIs. Thank you so much for your time and attention during this presentation. Hopefully it was helpful.
Thank you both so much. Rebecca, do we have time to take questions?
Probably not right now.
I don't see any questions in the chat, so we can probably move on to our panel. So to sort of connect the dots between Kiana and Deanna's presentation and our panel, the way we actually came to connect with these particular panelists is that we actually ended up interviewing them as part of our study. As we were interviewing students, we were also trying to sort of contextualize and understand some of the things that they were referring to. And so we reached out to administrators on the different campuses to understand what they were doing during the transition period and what kind of strategies they were using to support students in this particularly chaotic time. And so we'd like to bring our panelists, I say up, but I guess that's not what we do in the virtual space. I'd like to introduce our panel. Nancy Yang is the Associate Director of the First Year Experience at John Jay. Rahela Akhtar, I hope I'm saying that right, is the STEM enrollment coach at LaGuardia Community College. Ronald Jackson is the Vice President for Student Affairs at Brooklyn College. And Loretta, if you are on, you're the one person I didn't see yet, is the Director of Student Information Services at LaGuardia Community College. And we found that during our interviews with them, they all shared really interesting strategies that they really had to create on the fly to figure out how to support students. And so we thought we would give sort of this opportunity to lift up some of those things so that as we're moving into a sort of another summer of a virtual transition for students, that people don't have to, reinvent the wheel yet again, that you can kind of take some of these learnings and hopefully adapt them either to your own campuses or to your own organizations.
Thank you, Melissa. And we are going to start off with Nancy. So Nancy, I'm going to ask you the first question that we have for you. And we're so excited to hear all of the creative approaches you've tried at John Jay. But what did John Jay do to ease the transition for students starting college in a virtual environment last fall?
Thank you, Rebecca. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. Yes, I have a lot to say about what John Jay did to ease the transition, and I would love it if you all would use chat just to share thoughts and share feedback and comments. It's kind of like our virtual superpower, right? Like we can finally do a little bit of mind reading where we normally wouldn't be able to, right? So as it feels comfortable, even if it's just to shout out a yes or put an exclamation point, please feel free to do that in chat. So I just want to tell you a little bit more about me. I'm the Associate Director for First Year Programs at John Jay, and my role is housed in Academic Affairs. And so primarily I'm responsible for managing the success and retention programming to support first year transition, starting from the summer, sort of the handoff from high school, all the way until I hand off students going into their sophomore year to my sophomore programs colleague. And so like everyone in this room, we were worried about a lot of things going into the fall semester, students being unprepared, the chaos, lack of access. And so we created really from scratch this August Summer Bridge program, which was a 12-day experience. It was run like a course in Blackboard with some self-paced components and some synchronous components, along with a Slack virtual community that I'll talk a little bit about in a few moments. So students completed assignments in Blackboard, they participated in events and workshops and hangouts and connected with each other through Slack. And so we designed the program so students could be familiar with Blackboard, which most faculty used to manage their courses in the fall online, and also introduced a variety of tech tools and resources that would set students up for success. And so the expectation was that every student, every incoming first year student who wasn't otherwise in a specialized cohort like SEEK, Honors, Apple Core, because they already had their own designated summer programming, everyone else would participate in Summer Bridge, which meant that the entire incoming John Jay class was prepared for online learning in some way or another. Summer Bridge ended up serving a little over 1,200 students. And so true to the mission of John Jay to cultivate and nurture fierce advocates for justice, we also included in Summer Bridge videos we called Justice Talks, featuring faculty giving a lecture on a particular justice topic in their area of expertise. So just to give you some examples, voter suppression, microaggressions, police reform, just to name a few, and then followed up with an assignment to help students flex their inquiry skills. So again, this was another opportunity for students to feel like they were kind of in class, so that the first 2 or 3 weeks of the fall semester didn't end up being time where first year students were floundering and trying to figure everything out. So as soon as the fall semester started, the hope was that students would at least know and be familiar with some of the key things that they would need in order to be successful when they started classes. And finally, we were so worried about students being able to bond with each other. And in the last presentation, we saw that students really were missing the college feel, which is to make some friends, to hang out in lounges. So we created these Slack virtual communities that were led by peer success coaches. These are our really well-trained, super awesome, successful upper level students. And staff to keep students talking and engaged. We encourage them to connect with each other through Slack, but also on social media, sort of like meeting students where they were, and gave them a safe space where they could share and learn from each other. And just for those of you who aren't super familiar with Slack, it's a communication platform often used in organizations and businesses that utilizes channels and direct messages for folks to connect through topics. So some of the channels we had were our daily chat channels, meme channels, social media channels. And that ended up working incredibly well for us and the students. And so, you know, my team and I would log into Slack in the morning, throughout the day, and then before we ended our day. And the chat, the excitement, the connection was exactly what we wanted to see. And it didn't cost us anything to use Slack because we used the free version and it was perfectly suitable for our needs. So to sort of bring this Summer Bridge to life, I'd like to just share screen with you all, just to give you a sense of what it looked like for students. So this was the Blackboard platform, and we broke up Summer Bridge 12 quests. So this felt like a class, but we wanted it to feel like a really fun class, gamified class. So each day, students would log in and see the new set of assignments that they had, videos to view and things like that. And I want to just point to some of the cool things here. We organized some Slack hangouts with your classmates, recognizing that students often had their own sort of schedules throughout the day. So at any time we could make connections asynchronously. We also tried to do that to supplement the synchronous and live work. We used Padlet for students to introduce themselves, put up a photo of themselves. We encouraged them to sort of check out their classmates' intros and like them and comment on them. And here's an example of some of the key things we wanted students to know and do. So for instance, making sure that they're syncing their John Jay email to their phone and accessing them, of course, changing their Blackboard email, checking on CUNY First for the preferred email, things like that that are sort of standard for tasks that we want students to perform before they even start class. Let's see, quest 2 here, making sure that students were tech ready for the semester. And so, just having them be aware of the kinds of tools that they needed for class. Getting to know the different flavors because online learning in the fall at CUNY could not have been more chaotic, I think. And so just being very clear about what modalities meant and supplementing this piece with discussions of how you will show up for asynchronous classes that is different from how you would show up for synchronous classes and so on in order to be the most successful. We did a lot of screenshotting just to make sure students did not feel lost. And I'll go to one more quest just to show you what the Justice Talks looked like. Just college readiness skills here. So for instance, Professor Janice Johnson Diaz with her daughter, her daughter is Marley Diaz, who is now Netflix famous, but that was a follow-up event that we did to this in the fall. But Professor Johnson Diaz talked about how to really be the change that you want to see in the world with some very applicable, tangible strategies. And then we followed that up with a question board where, as you can see here, over 700 students submitted their questions for Professor Johnson Diaz, and then we sent her the top 10 for her to answer. And so it really felt, we felt like we designed a program that was very connected to what students need and helped them connect to all the John Jay resources that they would benefit from. So, there were 12 days of quests here, flexing different kinds of skills, introducing different skills, and I'll stop sharing here, but students seemed to love this gamified course, really enjoyed Slack and talking to and having access to their future classmates. Yeah, it was really just so fun to bring this project to life and really feel like it served students.
Thanks, Nancy. You're getting rave reviews in the chat. I think everyone's really excited by how innovative and creative and engaging this looks. I think I just have a follow-up question. Obviously, this looks like it was really successful. How is this maybe forcing you to innovate and try new things beyond the pandemic? And once maybe things go back to in person, will you be using some of these tools and ideas in continuation?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So we built Summer Bridge. And when I say we, I mean me and a college assistant built Summer Bridge. But the content is so useful no matter whether we're online or not. So we are going to, last year would have been the first Summer Bridge of Summer Bridges annually to come. And putting content on Blackboard for students to sort of work through right before they get to campus seems to be a really good strategy. So sort of mid-August leading up to the start of classes. So we definitely plan to continue providing summer bridge. And this year, what we need to think about is how to help students be successful when we imagine that at least half of their classes are going to be on campus and half of them will be online. And juggling that probably is going to be even more difficult than just simply juggling, not simply, but you know what I mean, juggling a consistent 5 all online courses. And we're also very concerned about this incoming class having a particularly tumultuous last year of high school, being online, not being online, and we will design assignments and collaborate with faculty to help sort of address the gaps before we start the fall semester. I'd say
Great, Nancy.
Slack also is something that we will continue to pursue. Again, just a platform to allow students to talk to each other and connect before the fall semester, but also during the fall semester to ask each other questions was really a powerful tool for us.
And Nancy, we have a few questions that just came in the chat that I want to ask you. Was this considered an orientation program or a separate?
Yeah, separate.
No.
Our student transition programs offered an online orientation with some supplemental synchronous live workshops, but we worked with them to ensure that the timeline looked like this. You went to advisement and then you got an overview of what John Jay has to offer through orientation and got to meet a few people. And then the handoff further then is to prepare you for fall and online learning through summer bridge. So there was a lot of collaboration involved to ensure that students knew sort of the distinction between these 3 different things, because they certainly on paper could sound very similar, and making sure that the timeline made sense for students as they were approaching the fall semester.
Great. Thank you so much, Nancy.
Sure.
A lot of questions that people still have. So I think we're going to move on to the next panelist, but I would love for you to chat and go through the questions that people might have and answer them. That would be great.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you, Nancy. Ron, I think we'll move over to you now. I think, Brooklyn College also tried a lot of different efforts over the last year to reach out to students in creative ways and also sort of troubleshoot which services you felt like you needed to prioritize to be operational during the pandemic. So I'm hoping you can kind of talk about, how you connected with students and how you figured out what services to be offering at which point in time.
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me. Welcome to all my CUNY colleagues that are out there. If you know CUNY can be very confusing. And Brooklyn College is 2 different worlds. So we have a very high transfer population. So a lot of the students came in, they knew the CUNY processes, but they need to know how that translated to Brooklyn College. And then we have a first time in college population that's really new, And so for us, we kind of had to look at those populations differently. So with our orientation program, we quickly had to adapt it and we put it all online. We don't have a nice class like Nancy did, but we took the same approach. We broke it up into different parts. Instead of doing a data dump, we kind of timed it based on the timeline, the enrollment timeline for students. So we had an introduction to the college was a component, an introduction to online learning was another component. Then it was getting engaged in an online environment was another component. And so we released it slowly, a component every week. It was also a way for us to try to keep the students engaged with the institution on an ongoing process. However, our website is also very confusing, so students had to learn CUNY First, they had to learn our own BC portal, they had to learn Blackboard, they had to learn the student engagement portal. So we could do all that we possibly can to give the information. Students still had questions, so initially when we went online, the directive was to make sure that we can communicate via email. So a lot of the offices had email communications. Then we moved to setting up phone lines so that students can talk to somebody in person. But students still had questions, and what we had to quickly do was to adapt to the technology because the students were using it. The one thing that most students have is their phones, you know, and on their phones, they can do everything. So what we started to do was to set up drop-in Zoom sessions, and it was anything you wanted, you know. So student affairs had drop-in sessions, the registration would have drop-in sessions, financial aid had drop-in sessions. And so it just allowed students to come in and ask whatever questions they wanted to ask. And then we would have breakout rooms that students can go into the breakout rooms to ask personal questions related to them. The good thing about using Zoom is, you know, when we're using email, it was a series of back and forth. Well, what do you see when you're trying to log into this? And them trying to explain to us or send screenshots. Going through Zoom, we were able to do screen shares and like really work directly with the students to kind of see firsthand what they were seeing and try to address a lot of the questions. When we were on campus, it was easier for students to come into campus, into your offices, and we would have like banks of computers where they can kind of log in and we can kind of work with them that way. So we tried to adapt that method using Zoom. CUNY and Brooklyn College went through several different sites. So we landed on Zoom. We had different platforms before we Zoom, but we got to that. Also through those just open-ended conversations, we listened. And so we started, you know, assessing the different types of topics that we were getting. So the big thing that came out was the health clinic. We have an on-campus health clinic. Initially, it was closed. Students pay an activity fee for it, but we were getting a lot of that feedback from students that they needed medication because we were providing that for free. They needed to get like physicals for jobs that they were having. So because of that, we then opened up the health clinic for a limited basis by appointment. The interesting thing is that we offered telemedicine for our personal counseling, and they actually increased. Now, a lot of students actually were going through a lot more mental health, but we saw that students were keeping their appointments more often. You know, because of that, we actually went after some additional funding and we hired 4 new counselors through some CARES money to assist because the caseload just increased a lot. The other thing that we noticed is that students, and interesting enough, so we had a wrap-up session with our Black and Latino Male Initiative yesterday, actually just kind of find out how the year went. And the students were struggling with separating academic and personal lives. So sitting at a dinner table doing your homework and having your brother or your mother, asking you questions, it was hard for them to kind of focus in. So as a result of that, we opened up our web computer lab, which also contains some study spaces, and we allowed students to reserve study spaces on campus following COVID rules and things like that and restrictions, so that they would have a personal place where they can kind of get peace and quiet to study. We also learned that some students did not have that. Some students were, studying in closets or, in restrooms with the door shut. And so we also started working with personal counseling in the health clinic to provide ongoing tips for students to how to best study. And some of that was, hey, go outside. As a result of that, students were coming back and saying, hey, I don't have adequate Wi-Fi. So we had to purchase some hotspots for students and made that available to them. And we would ship that to them to address those concerns. And so we were really trying to be as responsive as possible as we heard things come up to really kind of accommodate the needs for students. Also, we worked pretty closely with student government because students do pay a student activity fee. And so we were trying to work creatively with them to still try to figure out how to do online programming for students. And so student government also started doing some programs. And we also supported our clubs and organizations who actually had really innovative programs that they came up with, and we were supporting them to do that. In terms of, virtual tours, our athletics program has virtual competitions through Strava. In an off conversation with one of our veterans, he was working on a health program, and we said, that's a great idea. Let's scale that up and make it available to all students so that students can then kind of follow this healthy track of kind of keeping on health. And we also tried to take advantage of the various TikToks and challenges, and we tried to figure out how we can build off of that to also kind of create student engagement. So it's been an ongoing process. We're probably not going to be fully back on campus in fall. So we're actually adapting our online orientation again. Initially, it was all Zoom, so this is all you saw, you know. So we did go back on campus and do some fun things with our online orientation. And we're actually looking at implementing a summer bridge course this summer as well in collaboration with academic affairs.
Thank you, Ron. That's amazing. I think we were so impressed with the creativity and responsiveness that you and your team were carrying out over this last year. I don't know how we are on time, but I'd like to bring up Rahila. Hopefully you are here. To kind of talk. Hi. If you can talk a little bit sort of just about your experience working with students virtually, and I don't know if you're able to speak to it, but if you are, about LaGuardia's sort of proactive advising for freshmen, but just generally speaking about the strategies that you and your team have used over the past year to engage with students virtually.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rahila. I am the STEM enrollment coach at LaGuardia Community College. I am a part of the conversion team, where externally to students we're known as the pre-enrollment team. In terms of the the proactive advisement and registration, I can provide like a brief overview of what that process looks like. But unfortunately, I won't be able to provide very detailed information. So the proactive advisement and registration process, the way that it works is students complete a survey on their VIP page, which is the first place that they go to in terms of an online portal. They complete a registration survey that asks them basic questions such as to just confirm their major, whether they plan to go full-time or part-time. And one of the questions that, a new question that has been presented is whether they prefer to go take hybrid classes or in person or the online classes, fully online classes. So this is a new question that's been presented on the VIP page survey. And these questions go to an academic advisor at the college. And what they do is they'll be able to take a look at this survey and create a schedule for the student. And students have an opportunity to either accept the schedule or decline it. And or if they still have further questions, they can schedule an appointment with an academic advisor to speak further on their major. Maybe they want to change their major. Maybe they have questions about their class schedule. So they have an opportunity to change that. So they already have this, their classes set up for them if they are ready to get advised and registered. So that kind of advances them and takes away the, I think, kind of that additional step of having to worry about their class schedule. So that's just the overview. Maybe someone else at the college can definitely provide additional details about this process. And in terms of the new student population, the cohort that we work with, the conversion team, we work with students who accept the offer of admissions to LaGuardia. And the groups that some of the groups that we exclude are students who are already part of special programs such as College Discovery, CUNY Start, ASAP, because they do have their own set of communications that go out, and those program offices are directly in contact with students who qualify for those programs. So the students that we work with are anyone who are excluded from that group, but sometimes we still have other students who are part of ASAP groups, and we can refer them as needed because some of the information, there may be a delay in the information being updated within CUNY First. So in terms of the newly accepted freshmen and transfer students, as soon as they accept the offer, they are sent an email from our team. Well, this time we sent the initial communication of kind of an intro email. So they get a point of communication or a point of contact where they can begin the process of enrolling in LaGuardia. So after they get this communication, on the VIP page, that's where they're also able to see their enrollment coach information. We're a team of 6 enrollment coaches, and on the VIP page, they're able to have our contact information, our email, a link to a virtual meeting so they can join the virtual meeting every week, once a week, and ask any questions that they have. So kind of having that easy access. So they, from the beginning, they'll have that easy access to their enrollment coach should they have any questions or concerns about starting in any particular semester. So what we do is we begin the way that, we approached in terms of the pandemic and this transition from in person to online. The questions that we had on our mind is how can we manage the anxiety and expectations that students might have of attending in the fall semester? How can we facilitate that transition from high school to college as easily as possible? In this, very rapidly changing environment. So what we did was one of the things that we wanted to make sure was that to have the resources available that they would have had, or at least facilitating those resources in terms of being able to connect with multiple offices throughout the college. So we were the first point of contact in terms of completing their next steps to getting registered. And just to go over, some of the strategies that we used in terms of contacting students, we would have a list of students, our cohort, each week. And the way that we organized how we would contact them, or which order, would be the order in which they accepted the offer, and their record is updated within the CUNY First system. So they, as they're accepting the offer, they're beginning to get communications from us. They're beginning to complete their VIP page registration survey. And so this helped us to kind of have a timeline of and be able to track when they're accepted and what should happen next. So I think this timeline really helped us to meet the student where they are in the enrollment process. That way we can give specific instructions to each student on what they'll need to do next. So in terms of removing like a barrier, an additional barrier for students of having to contact maybe another office, we did serve as a liaison between the testing office, the admissions office. So we were able to give the student instructions. So for example, if there were particular things on their record that would have prevented or delayed advisement or registration, we would communicate with the admissions office, the testing office, and the transfer credit evaluation office, so the area in the admissions office, to kind of that removes one barrier that they'll need to go ahead and instead of having them contact the office directly, we were able to resolve that internally and then have students move along in the process. So one of the things that things like the proficiency index, sometimes students may have not submitted their up-to-date high school transcripts, and that's what was delaying the advisement and registration to move forward. So having that, just removing that additional barrier, I think really helped students to kind of ease their anxiety of, okay, how do I submit this document? What does this form mean? So I think that was one of the strategies that we use, is kind of removing this particular barrier. And then in terms of the other approach that we took in terms of removing the barrier is with the testing office, we were able to have access to the math assessment survey, which is in place of the CUNY assessment test in math, and then the ESL diagnostic assessment. We were able to, in some cases, email the student the testing link for their exam. We were able to have that particular link through the testing office and provide it directly to the student, as opposed to if they had to contact the testing office or try to figure out what's going on in terms of their testing needs. So, and then the other thing I just wanted to mention was about the timeline. I think really helped in terms of meeting, as I mentioned, meeting students where they are in the enrollment process. So we were able to have up-to-date information in terms of weekly reporting. And so we were able to give students a timeline of, okay, if you don't hear back by X X date, then you should contact us. So, and just in terms of contacting us, the other thing that I think really helped was giving students regular and direct access to the enrollment coaches. So they're able to, on the VIP page, which is the first place that they log into, they're able to connect with us through our virtual meeting links, as well as give us a phone call. And when we communicated with them, the texting really helped. That's what we saw really engage the student in terms of responding. And the virtual meeting links, just to quickly go over where those virtual meeting links were created. So they lived in Blackboard. We created virtual meeting links. We would offer them twice a week. So one would live in the VIP page, and the other ones we would offer to students through email communication, text communications. And I thought that Blackboard really helped in terms of students having that direct access, because they didn't need to create an account. Before we had access to the CUNY Zoom account, or students had access to that, we wanted to remove that barrier of having to create another account somewhere. For example, for Zoom. So for Blackboard, it really worked well for us because students were able to just click on a link directly and have access to us and ask any questions throughout the week. The other resource that I thought was very helpful was what we used and we feel was successful was Google Voice, and that's what we used for additional point of contact for students. So they would be easily able to text us a quick message if they had any questions. And the system for for Google Voice, what we saw was that we had to play around with it a little bit, because we had to make sure that we are adhering to their guidelines of using Google Voice. We had limitations on text messages, so we knew what was the capacity. Like it'll be 40 text messages maximum per day. So we kind of played around with that to figure out what was the limitations of Google Voice. And we learned that students are very responsive to like key words in text messages. So one of the frequently things that students ask at the beginning is, how do I register for classes? That was a very common theme that we noticed was, how do I register? So including keywords such as registration, I think was helpful in the text messages. And so this is, some kind of an overview of what some of the strategies that we use to engage with students, and just kind of removing the barriers to getting to advisement and registration, and being able, easily available and accessible through multiple modes such as Blackboard, Google Voice, our direct phone lines that are connected from our phone line from the college to our cell phone, emails. So I thought that these are, some of the strategies that worked, at least for our area, in terms of engaging the students. So yeah. Sorry, I went on there for a little bit.
Thank you, Rahila. That was fantastic. And I think, I think LaGuardia has done a tremendous job of just trying to be there for students, but I also think the sort of proactive advising approach of helping or sort of registering students for them on their behalf when they were obviously confused and sort of struggling with those things on their own was really, just spoke a lot to the work that you all are doing. Okay, Rebecca, are we turning it over to Yana? Hopefully, I know we didn't really get time for additional Q&A, but hopefully people will continue the very lively discussion in the chat. And if you have any questions that are not answered, of course, feel free to contact us and we'll connect you with the right people or resources.
Yes. And hopefully you can continue the conversation in the chat, and then we'll also have time in the breakout sessions. I think there's a lot of creativity and good conversation going, but I'm going to hand it over to Yana, who's going to share with us some resources that our colleagues over at Degrees NYC have created for supporting students. So welcome, Yana.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Rebecca. My name is Yana. I am going to talk quickly about the resources that we have created for And we are part of Degrees NYC. So just a quick shout out to Degrees NYC and a quick summary about the program. So Degrees NYC was established in 2016 by young Invisibles, graduate at NYC, as well as the Goddard Riverside Option Center. And the focus is really, it's co-led by the young people as well as educators, and the focus is equity in education. And there are 5 working groups or more so that are focused around college access and success, and with the aim of increasing the equity for those who are earning credits from post-secondary in the post-secondary landscape. And so I wanted to just quickly give you a quick overview of what we worked over the past year. And take you to the website. I think Rebecca was gonna put a link in there. There's also on the agenda, there's a link to the resources page as well. So I'm just gonna quickly share the screen. Okay, so once you double click on that link, it will take you here. And then for some, it has issues with downloading, but if not, this should come up. And it's basically divided up into 4 different categories. So the first one's thinking about your next post-secondary step. Are you an enrolled college student? Do you need help with a specific situation? And then are you a counselor advisor looking for resources to help your students? So what type of resources, what are they helpful for in terms of who can use them? Advisors, educators, counselors, students. And when I say students, I'm talking about college students, current students, students who are transferring to another school, students who are going their first year to college, and students who are, after graduating from high school deciding, you know what, I don't think college is for me. There's other pathways. Let me see what's the best fit. We have a wonderful, wonderful list of career and technical options and other things as well. I don't want to go, I know we have very limited time in terms of description of these resources, so I want to just give you a quick overview, a quick example of how to use one. So I'm gonna just actually double click one of those. Enrollment, I actually have opened up here. Sorry, no, just kidding. If you're, so it's right here. Okay, so virtual enrollment to-dos. So basically, we created this form for all the students to use who are attending CUNY. A lot of the enrollment to-dos are pretty much the same for every single CUNY. So we thought it would be really helpful for us to have this one page and to have steps to help students just follow them. What's really great about this is that if, let's say, a student, I have a lot of students who reach out to me and say, they're telling me to claim CUNY First account. What does that look like? So we actually linked up a tutorial so a student can use to make sure, to get the guidance and support. So even without the advisor or the, a professional, they can do this on their own. The other thing is that I want to emphasize at the bottom, we have also links to special programs. And so if, let's say if a counselor is just starting out and working with a student and they're not sure about the ASAP, what is ASAP? And so we have a link that is connected to ASAP that talks about the benefits, eligibility, etc. Really great information tool. The other one is, let's say if a student applied to ASAP but not sure in terms of like, do they get in or they have other questions. We also have a link here that shows all the contact information with all the campuses. So I know I did this very quickly, but I do want to emphasize that at the bottom, we have a contact information. So that's our email. So if you guys have any questions or any concerns, comments, anything that you found to be really helpful, or you want to add another resource, we definitely can work on that. And also we have some of our members here as well. Robin Blank and Lisa Lopasso are always, are also very helpful. They're part of the group and they can help out to answer any questions. So if you have questions, you're welcome to chat privately to them or just chat in the chat box.
Thank you so much, Yana. That's really helpful, and I think great resources for everybody that's on this call. And I'm really excited that now we have some time to really take and dive in some breakout rooms to start to brainstorm some tangible actions that we might be able to take away from all of this great information that we've shared today. Obviously, there was some research about enrollment. There has been sharing about what's happening on campuses, but we have a really great mix of stakeholders in the room, from CBOs, from CUNY campuses, from CUNY Central. And I think that meeting in some smaller groups, we might be able to come up with some great creative ways to launch into this fall and help students, support students in enrollment. So the next part of the session is going to be about 25 minutes in breakout rooms. We have an interactive slide deck where when you get pushed to your breakout room, you'll be assigned a breakout room number. You'll go to that slide number in the slide deck and start working with your group about the questions. The questions really focus on how can CUNY and CBOs collaborate for first-time enrollment for this fall, but also re-enrollment. And we can't wait to see what everybody starts to come up with. So I'm going to push us out into breakouts. We'll be pulled back with about 2 minutes left, and Latikwa's going to wrap us up at the end. So you should see breakouts. And is it telling you to go to a room? Or am I gonna have to do that?
It's inviting you to a room.
Great. And if you don't already see it in the resource guide, your interactive slide deck is right there at the top. If anybody is not getting invited to a room, just let me know.
I haven't been invited.
Okay, thanks, Joseph.
I'm not sure where I'm supposed to be. I'm sorry, I'm a little lost. I joined a little late. I'm not Loretta, I'm Nancy, but because Loretta's at another meeting. So.
I just sent you an invite.
Okay. So if I click join.
Yep.
Do you want to pause the recording?